So, good morning, everyone. And it's wonderful to see people here present. And also, I want to welcome people online, also on the different time zones. Maybe some of my brave colleagues from the UK time zone also are online. So I'm really happy to talk today about my work at the European Space Agency, especially with game design and immersive technologies. And I want to give you an overall understanding of what does it exactly entail and what kind of things do we need to take into consideration when we are using or utilizing methodologies that are maybe not so commonly used yet, but constantly more and more evolving and being used at the Space Agency as well. So I think a lot of people, when they think about games and space, have some kind of ideas in their mind of what kind of things does it entail. And indeed, I think, if my memory serves right, some of the first games that have, for example, in the digital world, been very popularized have been those with the theme of space. So I'm sure that a lot of people actually have some kind of favorites that entail space exploration or something on that line. There's a really interesting time that we are also living right now when it comes to space exploration, because there can be certain kind of parallels that we can see from the gaming world and to reality, actually, that are kind of closing in an interesting way together. And there is a reason for that. And that's also something that I want to talk right now to you more about. So in the picture behind me, you can see two different pictures. One is a real photo of footage earlier this year when the Japanese Space Agency's Slim Moon probe landed, and then the other one is from Kerbal Space Program. And I find this extremely interesting because it kind of shows of how we're closing in on some certain interesting topics now also in the real. But before I go any further, let me give you a proper introduction of what I do and who I am. So my name is Noora Archer. I work at the European Space Agency, mostly developing virtual reality and game design. I'm a trainee position there in a unit called Spaceship. You can see the logo here actually on my shirt. I started at ESA a bit over a year ago. And from then on, I've been working on topics around design and how to put it together with Space Agency. My background is I'm an alumni from Aalto University, from here, so I'm actually really close to my sort of mental home right now. But I also have background from before that from 3D visualization and biotechnology. In the slides it says BA, but it is a Bachelor of Science, actually. That's my mistake, I forgot to fix. And I am from Finland originally, but mostly my work now happens in other parts of Europe, in Germany and in the UK at the ESA units over there. And background also includes some stuff from co-founding startup company here in Finland in the area of virtual reality, and also working in mobile games. So around these topics I've worked for several years now, I would say. So even though I say I'm a game designer, and that is like a really big love and interest for me, my interests are also quite multidisciplinary in that sense. In the pictures behind me, you can see some examples of the works I've done in the recent past years. And it does include a lot of topics that also entail just doing some scientific research and testing different kind of prototypes, testing methodologies. And maybe the larger interest for me, even with games, is this kind of thinking. So what can we do? How can we make it maybe, how can we extend the possibilities of how games can work in tandem with different design aspects? And part of it is also communication, and how do you communicate actually with different kind of people, not only designers, but also engineers and scientists. Because I very much believe that this is the area where we actually have a lot to understand and gain from. If we understand and communicate better with different kind of areas, then we can come up with very extraordinary outcomes. In here I have a couple of examples of the visualization of complex knowledge that sort of deepens also my own interest. So on one side, you do see my master's thesis that was on the topic of visual design of quantum physics. And in the middle also a project that I participated here in the Aalto University, actually a research project on playable concepts and how could we add into a scientific and research information by implementing game design into the written information. So also using this kind of like two different ways of thinking about information. The other examples include project down here I'm going to talk you more about that I have worked on at ESA with, so Muse virtual spaceflight experience, and then just an interest that I brought up here, which is some of my studies here in Aalto University had to do with future design. And this is actually, it became extremely important to understand the basics and be able to use future design actually in the work that I have been doing at ESA. So I guess all of this is also to say that if you have a chance to take studies during your master's or during your bachelor's from different topics here in Aalto, please utilize it because it can be extremely useful for you in future. Yeah, so more about ESA and the Terrae Novae, which I'm part of. So these kind of interests that I just told you about actually align very well with the things that we do at ESA. Sort of inciting a positive change and aligning it with the kind of goals that we have as a society, as people, and as European people. So let me tell actually you more about ESA so that you understand what is this Terrae Novae and where I am working at. So maybe I should ask how many here know about ESA? I think, yeah, that's good, just to make sure. So there is actually only one international space agency in the world, and that is called European Space Agency. And if we think about that, I think that on its own already is pretty cool, because if you are an international space agency, it by default means that you are agreeing into certain kind of ways of doing and collaboration between nations. And this is in the very core of ESA. So, I mean, this is very inspiring as it is. And in the coming years, humanity is returning to the moon, and this time not just to see if it's possible, but to actually start research work there and really expand our vision of what can we see about the future. So if we think about that, it's a very big effort. It's a huge thing that will be part of our world quite soon in the future. And let me show you actually a little bit more about that. So, okay, this page has lots of text. Don't be disheartened by it. What I just want to show you is that a lot of the things that we do with exploration research does actually come back into the society in many different ways. And it also means that by contributing into space research, we are actually contributing into society at large. And in the end of it, we can also amplify both the competitiveness, but also just effects in different societal issues, for example, that will lead into helping to fight the climate change, for example. So there are lots of things, yeah, maybe that's the best thing to know, that it doesn't need to be on a one field where we actually make some kind of relevation. We can actually find ways to combine it with larger systems, because our world is very systemic. So a space agency contributes to science in these ways, but in many other ways too. And I won't be able to talk to you about the whole ESA today, because there is just a lot of it. There's satellite operations, there's Earth observation and these topics. But because I work at the exploration, I'm going to talk to you about exploration, and especially the Terrae Novae, which is the Human and Robotic Exploration Program of Europe. And it mostly refers to, as in the pictures you can see, into the next destinations that we want to take on in the coming decades. So let's look at those goals. So the first goal is the low Earth orbit. And that low Earth orbit means around the area where, let's say, you could imagine that it starts around where we have the ISS, so in around 400 kilometers, but it does go above that as well. We do have satellites and everything up there. So and to achieve continuity with the sustained European presence in low Earth orbit, in the interest of science, de-risking deep space habitation, and unlocking also the commercial opportunities. So maybe some people here already know the ISS, which is the International Space Station, is not going to be always there. So there's going to be a change in that as well. So the space, even in our low Earth orbit, is changing very much in the coming years to come. The next destination is then the moon. And we want to allow Europeans to explore the moon, to contribute to unveiling the mysteries of the solar system formation and trigger technological innovation in preparation for human journeys to further on, for example, to the Mars. So there's a lot of sides to the moon that we haven't really, quite literally not seen yet. So once we get our boots to the moon again and we can establish some kind of research base there, then we can actually conduct science that we've never been able to do before. So that alone is also very interesting. But then the third destination is, of course, the Mars. And we want to expand knowledge of the red planet and prepare to take the Europeans to this horizon goal and return them back safely as well to Earth. And in doing so, test the limits of science and technology while devising and cementing an approach to international cooperation. So when we talk about different bodies in our solar system, of course, we're not talking anymore about just a European endeavor, but we're talking about an international endeavor. And there's a lot of things that are developing and need to be developed in this. And it is really exciting to think that all of this is actually not that far away. So there's a lot of information on this page, but you can also check it if you Google Explore 2040. You will find more information on that. But what I mean to say with this slide is that we already have identified a lot of different kind of topics that need to be explored in order to get there into the 2040 and to have preparation for human exploration of Mars. But indeed, a lot of technology points, like if something to notice from here is that a lot of things have something to do with developing new technology and engineering especially. So one might ask in this point, because I'm a game designer, how does game design actually support these kind of extraordinary and historical goals that we're talking about? And this is indeed something I've been researching and working on and learning of how does ESA actually utilize game engines. And I will talk more about that. But actually, in this point, I really hope that you already feel a little bit excited and maybe you have already learned something new about our coming future, because it is something really to be interested on. And indeed, if you want to learn more about all of this, Google Explore 2040, maybe at ESA, and that should take you to our Terrae Novae quite easily. So a couple words about design in general, not just game design, but design as a whole. As I say, my background is also not only in game design, but at a larger design. So design must support exploration goals always, which means that we must be aware of the users that we aim to help. Exploration preparation is the area within larger exploration goals that, as the name suggests, operates in the area of preparing for something that we have not tested yet, or that we only are able to test limitedly. And some part of this opens also the door for more for speculative or even radical innovation on this area, and the methodology that we utilize when we talk about design methodologies. To give a sort of like more understanding into this, there are a couple different kinds of ways to approach the future. So design thinking and future thinking are two things that I have to keep in mind, for example, when I'm thinking about my work. So on one hand, we can approach the future by little increments. And this is also how it most of the time works with technology development at ESA, because we have something called technology readiness levels, which means that we do these little changes, we test, we see if it works, and then we test it again to little by little further it into a position where we can actually say that it fully supports human spaceflight and human and robotic spaceflight. So design as well can be done in a bit of the same way. We can move a little bit forward and do these incremental innovations. But we can also choose a different way to do it, for example, by doing modular innovation, meaning that we develop a product, for example, or a software solution, and then we try to think how could we modularize the parts of it so that it can actually service, for example, different stakeholders. At the Space Agency, we do try to think of, like exploration does have a lot of people, not only astronauts. In the earlier picture, we saw Matthias Maurer in the ISS. So astronauts, of course, are some of the main users of exploration preparation, but we have everyone else as well. Even going down so much as to say that we need to prepare our society in some way and talk about. So one of the reasons why I'm talking about it right here today. And then there is also a way to look at the so-called day in the future scenario with more radical innovation methods. So to really try to look into a future that does not exist yet, that we don't have technological solutions to yet. And then while this kind of information does not fully operate with this kind of being exactly sure that this will happen, it does actually open the door for alternative solutions and opening our mind to ideas that could be possible. And I think this is really interesting because it by default suggests that change that we might think is impossible actually is possible and even sometimes inevitable in that sense. So again, I urge you to think about it from a larger point of view. Sure, we talk about exploration preparation here, but at society as well. Game innovation can sometimes lead into a change in society that might have seemed impossible yesterday. So there are many ways that we can approach design thinking when inside the scope of exploration preparation. So I wanted to give you a couple of pictures from my work at ESA. So some of it is very similar to what you would do in any design work, I suppose. Personally, I like using paper prototypes. I like doing lots of writing by hand. But of course, we use tools also, Miro or Canva or other tools that usually designers do use. But most important thing is in the design work that we do that it is very multidisciplinary. So whatever the means are that we need to communicate, for example, game design, it needs to be something that we can actually talk about to scientists who have never worked with game design, and try to find also ways of really finding the common ground in this. At ESA, we have 1,600 active scientists from 36 countries, which also means that we are extremely multicultural work environment. And this, I think, is very true for many work environments nowadays. So again, this is another point just to make that, that the design work, the game design work we do must also include that. Yeah, and so if you do have a secondary interest for something now during your studies, I urge you to look into that as well and really develop this kind of multidisciplinary, international kind of foster these kind of skills and environments around you, which I believe comes quite naturally if you do work, for example, or study, for example, at Aalto, because I felt that it came really naturally for me, at least when I was here. Yeah, and then the work needs to, as I said earlier, it needs to support the rest of the work at the agency. Oh, yes, in the picture, For example, here it does give some really cool opportunities. Though this me in the analog moon facility, wearing a kind of a protective gear to be able to be there. The sand that you see there is the so-called moon dust regolith simulant. So, so it does give also design work. While it is the same, it is also something a bit different quite often. Yeah, so a couple more words about, I've been talking about this exploration preparation. So the logo you see there is the work unit that my work unit Spaceship is part of, the exploration preparation, research and technology. And now the ExPeRT aims is to deliver results from different science areas and offer a compelling vision towards where we are headed. So the idea is that while technology pushes us forward, the vision pulls us forward. And this I kind of want to point out because now you can already see what I told before about the design methodologies that we actually have used. They actually align quite well with the idea of exploration preparation. So how do we do this then? We have certain challenges in here. Let me show you quickly the main challenges. Probably some of these you already might have guessed or thought about. So when we put something into space, there are certain kind of technology concerns. If we put humans or machines or robots, the lack of oxygen, lower gravity or no gravity, temperature changes. For example, in the picture, we have a visualization of astronauts working with the Argonaut lander on the moon's surface, a concept image. But in this kind of environment, for example, the temperature changes can radically change to what we would, for example, have on Earth. The lighting conditions, the missions that are now being planned with the Artemis are headed towards the south pole of moon, which means that the shadows over there will be extremely long and extremely dark. So basically you have these completely dark areas that does make it challenge, but there is also a reason why the exploration is going to be happening in that area, but it's just something that we need to take into consideration and understand. Distances are of course large. There is radiation in a completely different level than what we have it on Earth. Then the moon dust itself, the regolith, causes several issues. It's very fine on the top of the lunar environment, for example. It causes a lot of dust to raise up, and then there's issues that it can cause to the machinery and human health. And then, of course, one of the big issues is weight limitations, and this is particularly when we want to take something up to the moon, because we cannot take we have to take as little weight as possible with us and try to utilize what we have in moon. I would like to add into these also sort of things that when I look at these things, when I think about design concerns or guidelines for when I'm developing games. So things I need to take into consideration, for example, is the physiological and psychological considerations for the human. Game design is a human-centered discipline, which means that we really need to think about the user and how they actually feel about these environments. For example, a very real fact about space is that you are going to have a limited amount of people around you, and you will have isolation, which can cause, in a prolonged time, for example, issues. Another thing to consider as a designer is the range of users. So I mentioned earlier already, we develop for astronauts, but also for, let's say, ground operations or other people, scientists and researchers who work at ESA. Then there is this real world and simulation gap, which means that even though we can make a virtual reality experience, anyone who has tested it knows that there are always limitations to and a kind of a gap that we cannot completely breach, at least yet, between the real world and the simulation. So how can we develop that in such a way that it does actually support all these activities and directs us towards the technology readiness, higher technology readiness, and we just don't assume that it doesn't matter. For that reason, we have low tolerance for failure, because we are indeed trying to put people into a place where they naturally cannot survive without help. So it's a challenge for a designer. Multidisciplinary communication I actually talked about as well, but then also the evaluation of the return of investment, so to say. So we put time and effort and even money into all of these operations. So we need to be aware of how much do we use time for the design operations as well, and what do we design, and is it something useful? How much can we use time for it? Within the spaceships, we divide these areas that mostly have to do with the technology into these 5 different categories. So we work with energy, advanced manufacturing, disruptive technologies, physiological and exercise countermeasures, and space resources. So game design goes under mostly the disruptive technologies. I'm trying to think if I should say something more about this topic. So, but actually, now that I think of it, you can actually put design into all of these. All of these need design, and all of these also can utilize game design in that sense. But I guess most of the time, in my experience at least, we have mostly used them in the disruptive technologies and then in the physiological and exercise countermeasures, for example. But of course, we are only getting started, so this might change quite wildly in the future, and we might have much more utilization, for example, in the in situ work, for example, in this kind of setting that you see here. We could visualize, for example, operations that you do, some kind of scientific measurements that you do on the moon. A little bit more about the work at Spaceship. So we are we're divided under 3 driving goals: enhance, enable, and inspire. And this is also to give you an understanding when I say multidisciplinary work environment. So people who work on these fields, I work with them as well. So to be able to communicate on wildly different topics is quite crucial. Enhance, for example, means in this that we can utilize some kind of technologies that exist already now on Earth, such as 3D printing, for the purpose of for example, using the filament combined with the regolith dust, and use as little as possible of the filament to create some kind of 3D manufacturing process that we can take to the moon. And then, for example, print things like bricks, maybe structures that can be used in a habitation. The other pictures here is there's a little research paper picture also from sintered glassy surfaces, so melting the regolith to create these surfaces on the moon, again utilizing something that is already there. And then there's also a picture of regolith being melted. Another aspect of this is enabling. So that means that as the astronauts work longer times and are exposed to different kind of elements of space, we, for example, want to offer them health monitoring or abilities to protect themselves better. For example, in this at Spaceship, we utilize AI to, for example, in the over image here, to monitor the changes of the eye and, for example, see that when radiation is a big problem outside Earth. So, for example, the changes on the eye to see if the radiation has done damage, for example, the eye. So we can use AI to actually monitor this with your own phone. And the lower picture is a simulation image of how much sheltering one would need on the moon, for example, if you utilize different kind of materials. For example, regolith. How much would you need regolith around you that you would be protected from the radiation while on moon, and, for example, could spend a day or 2 weeks over there. And finally, the third part was inspiring. So we want to inspire the research direction to benefit different research and development directions, and communication towards the public audience as well. So I'm happy to tell you that immersive technologies have been identified in the agency as some of the key tools that help us understand the environments and scenarios of outer space. There's also new opportunity that maps the area between technology development and human-centered aspects, which is developing digital tools to enhance the capabilities of analog testing environments. In the picture, I mentioned earlier an analog moon that we have at Cologne at the European Astronaut Center. And here is a picture of that, of 2 astronauts doing analog testing in this Luna facility that we have. So one way that we can also utilize immersive technologies and game design is we have now this capability of an analog environment. We can monitor that analog environment, and the output of the data that we collect from here, then we can, for example, use in a virtual environment that further enhances the capabilities that might be more challenging to test. For example, the Luna facility has only a limited amount of ways how we can show gravitational differences. We do have a system for it, but then maybe we can help something like this. And of course, it is also limited in size. So maybe in virtual reality, we can actually enhance that as well. So, okay, now you know a lot about the realities of the challenges as a designer and what kind of things we need to have in mind when we are developing gamified simulations or game products in general. So let me talk more about the actual outcomes, the immersive experiences that we can make. So firstly, game engines are one of our main tools that we are already utilizing quite heavily for research work. And the game engines that we use currently at EAC, for example, are Unreal Engine and Unity mostly, but also, of course, development on other platforms and seeing how we can utilize them better. But of course, the benefits that we especially see in Unreal Engine and in Unity is their visual capabilities and already quite well mapped systems around virtual reality, extended reality, or augmented reality. So that, of course, is something that then we don't need to develop anymore. We can directly go into the design phase. You can imagine working with games outside game industry for sure, because it has been utilized in many industries. But game engine developers such as Epic Games and Unity report that in the recent years especially, their engines and platforms have grown significantly in popularity in industries that are not related to gaming directly. So this is a part of a kind of a global trend, and it also shows that these engines have their own interest to develop into this direction. Yeah, and this is all due to the benefits of the game engines offering to visualization and digitalization at large. So in some way we are talking about serious games, I think, but because it enhances the preparedness in a low risk setting. But gaming as a word is still quite new at the Space Agency if we look at it at large. So one of the challenges can be also that because when you work in a very engineering-driven industry, there are usually already practical ways of doing things. And for example, process standardization is extremely high in a space agency. So in this kind of environment, finding ways how to increase the gamified method use is also something that we want to research constantly and that we work constantly to make better. So it is risky business to incorporate new methodology because of these points that I have pointed out. But in 2021, McKinsey reported that digital simulations are becoming more central to decision-making in areas like aviation and defense already. So in many ways, this kind of de-risking has already been identified as something that we should do. And it is more a question of better integration of this methodology. So that also means that if we have more game designers working in space agency, then we have more people developing these methodologies. And a very tangible way to see this is also that game-based training is measured cost effectiveness, for its cost effectiveness, because you can retake, for example, certain trainings in much easier way than how things are done traditionally. In the picture here, you can see a so-called parabolic flight, which in the upper corner, you can see how it basically works. It's a flight with a special airplane to create the environment of lower gravity, for example. But there is, and in the picture, we are testing it with virtual reality, but if you imagine that you didn't have a virtual reality there and you're just testing this for its gravitation, for example, there's only a limited amount of times that you can do this. So if we develop ways that we can use gamification for this, we could actually do testing much more with lesser cost, and of course, it's also better for the environment. So at ESA, utilizing immersive and actionable virtual environments has been identified for various benefits in multiple different areas. These areas are, for example, the training of astronauts in virtual reality environments, also the training of and familiarizing of other ESA research staff in operations. But then there is also integration opportunities for collaborative communication between ESA and other bodies of the society, and, for example, collaborative companies. And then, of course, the outreach opportunities towards public audiences as well. So the science behind the immersive gaming is identified with the powerful way that our brain can learn and memorize new information, especially when it's structured in a meaningful way. When I say structured in a meaningful way, I'm angling towards storytelling. But before I go into storytelling, I just want to talk in general about the way that when we use virtual reality, especially if we are in a new, so something we've never experienced before, let's say going to Mars, for example. Research states that we do actually learn better and we memorize better, and we recall what we remembered in that moment better. So the reasons for using it are very tangible and very real, and extremely useful, especially for something like this that nobody knows how did we do this before, because we haven't done it before. But yeah, then this can be further developed for usability via game design principles, such as feedback loops or progress tracking and tutorials. So then we actually have these parts that we can directly also utilize from areas that are more familiar for game design, for example. Yeah, there are various studies done on this at ESA, but also in other research bodies such as MIT. So I mentioned I'm going to angle towards storytelling because this is an important topic for me. And again, maybe less utilized wording and less utilized kind of like a research methodology at the Space Agency so far. So storytelling is human-centered aspect of both game design and immersive experiences that is worth more research in general. So sometimes it is assumed maybe, well, maybe not so much when you have a game product for game industry, but maybe outside game industry, it is oftentimes assumed that storytelling sort of happens on its own when you have an immersive environment and you put a human into it, then things start to happen, but which is true partly, but then in order to map this is important for us, because as soon as we can map these outcomes, then we can actually include it in the methodology, which means we can develop more of it and add more into it. So this is something that game design can actually help a lot with outside the gaming industry, because it naturally connects gaming, or game development itself naturally connects narratives into digital experiences, for example, and the structures also in the technical side. So there are lots of tools already ingrained in platforms such as Unreal Engine or Unity that support storytelling. So this is a part where we can really map the methodology into the wider context. So I'm going to show you a little example of the work in this field. So I want to introduce you to Muse, a virtual spaceflight experience that I started working on at ESA about a year ago. So Muse is a spaceflight experience where the user travels on board a speculative European spacecraft called Muse to the Lunar Gateway space station. So in this picture, Lunar Gateway is that small thing over there. So first, we are on the orbit of Earth, we travel to the orbit of the Moon, and then we transfer to the Lunar Gateway. Those who don't know what Lunar Gateway is, indeed, it's not there yet. So there is no space station yet called Lunar Gateway, but it is in the process of being built to help the operations around the Moon, precisely because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. So my task was to take a step towards the speculative opportunities of European spaceflight and create an experience that informs us of the human-centered aspects of this kind of spaceflight, and may help to also pull the technology readiness towards the future, towards a point that we have not had yet. So, then to also have the ability to measure its usefulness. So now I've talked a lot about the usefulness of and how could game design be useful for space agency or the technologies that we use. And this is precisely sort of the thing that I wanted to then test. Could we develop a methodology that we can implement in these systems that are already existing? So Muse, Muse stands for Modular User-Centric Spaceflight Experience. Because we use a lot of acronyms at ESA, and it's part of our jive to really find fun ways to say things in a shorter way. Something a little bit about the user testing. So there was two aspects to the user testing. The first part of the experience is that you simply experience the spaceflight on its own. You're inside the capsule. You can move around in zero gravity. You can play around with the zero gravity. For example, there are certain objects that are flying around. You can view the Moon, you can view Earth and experience it and then comment on this. So the first part of the experience was so-called speak out loud method that we tested with users. And just to have them openly communicate about what they're seeing, what they're hearing. We also had the communicational loops behind this, so mapped from already existing missions. So there was this very accurate information about what do you actually hear when the ground communication is talking, for example, with you and with the space station. And the second part of the experience was a situational awareness testing. And you can see a little part of it here being shown. So here, for example, you would hear the ground control tell you certain kind of things that are going to happen next during the mission. So in the second part, we are docking into the Lunar Gateway. And the docking operations are quite knownly, they are quite not that easy to do. There's lots of parts to it. There's a lot of precision that you need to have in mind while the docking operations happen. So we made a simplified version where we are testing of the user's ability to actually follow the conversation and know when certain things are happening. And I don't know if you have ever listened to, for example, the operational loops from, for example, from old Apollo missions. There's a lot of information, and we don't hear them all, for example, when we watch maybe a bit more modern YouTube video of the launch experiences, for example, because we only get a bit of a limited information there. But there's a lot of communication that the astronauts hear, and of course with that ground operations or others are also aware of. So user testing was incredibly important for measuring the success of Muse for us. And what we found out was that Muse offered a naturally flowing experience that was guided by a narrative, but that it also let the users experience and explain to us what they are feeling, how are things going. Should I? Yeah. Okay, I will go a bit faster forward. Thing we found out about Muse was that we can use it for a modularity that is born from the game engine use. So here, for example, you see the Muse capsule. We could divide it into parts, and basically, while we're working, for example, with people who then design these parts, for example, a space capsule, technically we could take them and change them as much as we want and communicate which type of combination of both the structure or the payload, so all the scientific instruments, is the best for the experience. But we also modularized the experience itself. So instead of going to Lunar Gateway, you could go to the lower Earth orbit, or maybe even to Mars. So this is all the potential that we already have inside the game engine. And even we could modularize the methodology that we use. So we would not need to use think out loud method or situational awareness test. We could also modularize this. Yeah, so I mean, this is extremely useful and something that I also will keep working on to see what kind of potential we can get out of using a game engine and all the narrative design around it, for example. So then here is a quick show to you of the second experience that we created, now in just a fraction of the time of the before, because we utilized the modularization. So here you can see, for example, that we added a launch sequence, lower Earth orbit, and then the splashdown to Earth. And I think I have a little video, it should be only a minute long, so I will show that one from the Muse experience that we then developed further and that we used for engaging audiences in Gamescom 24, which is, I think, the world's biggest gaming event.
3, 2, 1. Ignition.
Ignition.
You are go for booster separation.
Separation confirmed. Seems like we have zero gravity.
You are now en route to the orbit. Heat shield now exposed for re-entry to atmosphere. Readying now for splashdown. 400 meters. 200 meters. Brace for splashdown. Muse splashdown. Welcome back.
Anyway, of course, because we did put it for this general audience, we added a bit of flashiness. But the good thing about here is that we did actually talk with the astronauts and heard their experience of the launch and re-entry. So a lot of the information, for example, this flash of light when the fairing opens and you actually see outside, they do actually experience it like that. It is like a great flash of light, and apparently it is very cool. So I will continue working at ESA and visualizing these possible futures that we are going towards. While a village on moon is not yet reality, it might be surprising of how soon it might come. So I mentioned Explore 2040 earlier. 2040 might feel like it's really far away, but it's just 15 years actually. So it's a long time in some way, but I think that every one of us can imagine what we might be doing in 15 years. And that's a point when possibly we will have people thinking of the first people touching the Mars surface. So I think if you can, stay with us at the ESA and in just being interested in space exploration. If you want to hear more, this is a link to our Instagram, where we get lots of information from the astronauts, from the operations, and it would be really nice if you follow us, so we also get more people interested, and we can make more outreach. A quick picture from the Astronaut Center, if you are interested of what it looks like over there. Here is the little Marvin rover that we also have that we test. and then a lot of people that work there. I am there somewhere in the center of the picture. And now I would like to know, do I have time to show one video? Do I have time to show one video? One video, okay. So I will show you one video as a greeting from European Space Agency. There we go. One more link. If you are interested or know someone who is interested in internships, they are open right now at ESA. So if you want to scan this one or show it to someone else, there's a lot of internship opportunities. Join us. We would love to have game designers or whichever is your background. Thank you.
Thank you, Noora. That was so amazing. I mean, congratulations of taking the game design lessons learned here in Aalto and in your past experience to this massive production of us getting back to the moon.
Yeah, I mean,
that's amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, I can also say thanks to Aalto for offering opportunities to study things so multidisciplinary way, because
yeah, we've had a lot of collaboration with ESA, so I think it's good.
Yeah.
All right, so time for questions. If there's anyone in the audience that wants to ask something, raise your hand, and there is the first one. We'll bring the mic, so please stand up and speak to the mic.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for the talk. That got me excited about space once more. So you work a lot with scientists, researchers, stuff like that. So I wanted to ask you, how do you get these people to understand game design and game design concepts? Is it hard every time you do it, or have you found a way to kind of like get them understand the basics or something, and then it's easier to work together? Thank you.
Great question. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So on one side, luckily, it's not completely new for everyone. So we do have operational bodies within, for example, at the European Astronaut Center, for example, XR team that fully works on immersive environments to help, for example, to train the astronauts. So when I talk at ESA on this, luckily everyone, or many people have already seen people going around with VR headsets and seeing some kind of gamified environments. But usually I think when it comes to the methodology itself, that can be more challenging to explain because it comes from a very different background. But how to kind of bridge between this? Well, I mean, one thing I actually would like to implement in ESA is for us to make games together more, because games, as I have identified, and especially with working with Ako and Soli before, is that games themselves are a great platform for communicating with different people. So I'm hoping that we can actually do something like that with ESA, and I know there is already interest for it.
Internal game jams?
Yeah, for example.
Yeah,
or,
great.
Yeah, we'll see, or maybe participating in Global Game Jam and starting from there.
Yeah, that's very nice. So I have a question for you, because like it's kind of important to highlight.
Yeah.
As a game designer in projects like this, how much of your time is to just get to know of the topic, like researching? You were showing a lot of that in the slides, like it's a massive amount of details that you kind of have to digest. So, but can you walk us through like how much of your time is for that?
Yeah, so a lot. Yeah, a lot, because ESA produces a lot of research as well. So a lot of the time, a lot of things that we actually do that you see quite often when you talk with your peers as well is people are looking for a research and, hey, where can I find this research, and I can read it. And but in numbers, I mean, I would say that most of my time is still in the development process, but whenever I can, I do read a lot of research. And so that's kind of a part of my work all the time. I quite often have a Kindle with me, and I download lots of PDFs on it, and I read whenever I can. The good thing about it is that most of it is also really interesting. So I don't feel always like it is something that I need to do. But
yeah, so it's good to be a game designer in ESA that is also very passionate about the space exploration.
I would say so.
Yeah.
And one thing that is really good is that, at least for my experience, everyone that I talk with at ESA is extremely happy to talk about their work, and maybe even looking for an opportunity to talk about it more, because when we do communicate together in person, we do actually learn a lot of information by just asking, hey, can you tell me about your work? What is radio isotope thingy that you're working with?
Yeah.
And then you actually learn a lot more about it.
Yeah, so if you ever get out from ESA, you would know so many interesting details about space exploration and other stuff.
For sure, a lot of, on a certain level, but of course it's difficult to actually understand what every expert is working on. But I think it has really expanded my understanding of how can technology be done together.
Yeah, super exciting. Any other questions from the audience? We can take one more audience question, but I have a question about the kind of difference between projects. Like you create mostly like these training simulations for the astronauts themselves, but you also work with outreach projects, right?
Yeah.
So what is the difference between those, like in terms of, for instance, how much fiction there can be, or entertainment part? Like, can you explain a bit of that?
Yes. So it depends also what are we testing. So, but on a baseline, of course, when we communicate to the general public, we don't have to have, for example, a methodology that we want to test. So that one we can remove from it. So we did not do, for example, situational awareness testing on the audiences in Gamescom, because that we are not collecting that information.
Right.
But to be factual is really important in every situation where it really matters. So especially, of course, for the testing, but we do try to do it also with the public outreach. So before we release something, we do go through it internally to see if this is the information that we want people to learn. Because very often the first time when people see something, they probably take it as a factual information, and that might change their whole career plan. If someone is 10 years old and they learn about this might already be the one inspiration that will put them forward on a path to become an astronaut one day. So we do have quite carefully also have to plan what kind of information we give to the public.
How much do you have to invent things? That is like, I mean, like a lot of the things for going back to moon or for other space explorations, they have not been invented yet.
Yes. Yeah.
So how much as a kind of a designer have to invent like buttons or user interfaces?
So early on, it starts with a lot of like, I draw a lot of just sketches, and I might start working from a point of view of just looking at a finished design vase and then start planning. So it can be based on a very imaginative idea. But of course, from that point on, it usually develops more into the reality. And again, it really depends on what are we testing it on. So for example, in the Muse experience, the hull structure is not something that has been tested. That's my design. So, but we are not actually testing the outside hull or the experience on that. But of course, if we took it into a further development, then we would need to look into this. So maybe that gives an overall understanding.
That's an amazing project. We have to move with the program, so let's give another hand for Noora's keynote. And yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.